Kevin Kelly, welcome to Preferred Return. I've said this a couple times on recent episodes with recent guests. It's been a long time coming. This one has been the longest time coming. You happen to be here in the Altvia office today. For this is not like the first time you've been back. Welcome. I wonder when you're not here and then I see you here, what it's like to be here. What do you feel when you're back here?
Yeah, well, first off, thanks. It's an honor to be on the podcast, and it's really cool to see what you've been able to build here over the last couple of years. But yeah, coming back here, it's oddly familiar. Like, it doesn't feel any different to me at all. It's kind of like it's sort of the same place with different people, different faces that it changes and evolves. And it's been really interesting to me that it's never felt like, a big homecoming or I'm coming home. It just sort of feels the same as it always did. And I think that, one of the things that was really important to me and really our whole leadership team, and you were and are still part of the leadership team, is creating a space that kind of had energy, and you can definitely feel the energy when you come in here, and it's really cool. And I also think that just the wide open nature of it and being able to come in and see everyone that's here, and it's cool to see kind of coming out of COVID. There's definitely more and more activity that's happening here, and that activity happens when people are here together and bumping into each other. And over the last, I guess it'll be almost 2 years since I officially stepped back. And it definitely seems like there's an uptick in people coming into the office, at least overlapping when I'm here. So it's exciting to see.
Yeah, it's cool to have you back. I get the benefit of I get to talk about you a lot with new employees and telling the story and stuff. And then it's really cool because then sometimes you're just here and they're here and, almost like all starstruck. And I get to introduce you and be like, hey, it's just Kevin, which doesn't suggest you're any less of a star to me than you are to them. On that note, I think, was it probably, I was trying to kind of recall back, rewind the tape, 2007, 2008, perhaps, when you and I first met, somewhere in that neighborhood?
I think it was probably 2008. I think. Yeah, I could probably go back and look. That's one of the things I love, this world of everything gets put into our calendars, is you can go back and kind of look at that stuff. Although I don't know if we were on Google Calendar at that point. But yeah, it was either 2007 or 2008. And I recall coming to the Greenspring offices in Owings Mills, Maryland, and meeting at that time. And yeah, it was clear, we were kindred spirits in a way. I think not only with the Colorado connection, but just interested in this stuff. And yeah, I remember just sort of probably both of us after we first met, just kind of coming up with little reasons to keep in touch with each other. I remember when Utah and Colorado ended up in the Pac-12 together, we touched base on that, and it was really neat to kind of keep that. And we had a few more conversations along the way about business, and then ultimately Greenspring came on or Montague Newhall at the time came on as a client, and then. Yeah, I'll never forget when you called to let me know that you were interested in coming out to Colorado, and if there was anyone that I'd be willing to put you in touch with. And I said, well, what about coming to work for us? And I was kind of half kidding when I said that, knowing what you were doing. I thought that there would be probably lots of opportunities, and turns out it stuck. So. Yeah. Hard to believe.
I remember it fondly as well, and I think I've even told that story a couple times recently, and so that's the exact manner in which I recall it as well. So there it is. I'm telling it as it was. Yeah, been a wild ride though. It's happened. What's just sort of, so being back here is one thing, but just, what overall kind of what do you think about it all? I love that you've had a couple of years now to kind of, step out, get a different perspective and stuff. And again, you talked about what it's like to come back here. But now, I guess first off, what are you up to now? Yeah. Let's make sure we set that as a foundation.
Yeah. So one of the thoughts that popped into my head, and I think it might be relevant in this context, is one of the things that I thought was really interesting about my initial experience and also your experience, so my initial experience coming from helping RCP as kind of a contractor or an advisor, and them being a fund of funds. And then I think also the experience that you brought here coming from Montague and now Greenspring, or I guess now Stepstone, as a fund of funds. So that for some reason that kind of popped into my head is I always think about, it was so awesome that this first client that I had, or the first opportunity I had to work in this space, was the fund of funds, because it gives you that perspective of really being in the center of the universe and the view of the world as a GP and an LP. And I think that was something that you brought as well. And I think that was probably something that we shared, that we'd be in some conversations with, with other super smart people, and we would have this perspective of like, I know that it looks like that, but it also looks like that, and there's like all this nuance. So I don't know, that just kind of popped into my head in terms of like what's going on and something that we shared. But to this question, so I am now the Chief Information Officer of P10. P10 is a publicly traded holding company that's based in Dallas. And P10 really kind of came into being back in 2018 when they formed a partnership with RCP Advisors. And as you know, and maybe other people listening to the podcast know, RCP Advisors in Chicago was and is client zero for Altvia. So I started working with RCP as far back as maybe even 2004, kind of 2004, 2005, building an access database for them. And I've got a funny story to tell you.
I love when you talk about the access databases.
Yeah.
And I love you work with access databases even more still.
But so I had gotten the start with RCP in 2004, 2005 maybe. And I built this database for them, and then the database kind of grew, and we can get into sort of how VIA kind of grew out of that. But RCP is kind of really where I got my start in this space. And they've continued to be a great firm that has kind of pushed Altvia, I think, to do cool things. And so P back in 2018 kind of formed a partnership with P10 where they created this entity that was a sort of a holding company. And the idea being that they would be able to go out and acquire other managers, with the idea being that RCP had done some really, really cool things with data that both you and I had a lot to do with over the years in terms of building out that infrastructure. Now, most of the heavy lifting was done by Lindsay and Ross Koenig at RCP in terms of like building that out. But one of the many things that I think P10 saw as very appealing about this partnership with RCP was the discipline that they had around data. So, from 2018, P10 went on to acquire now 6 other asset managers. And when I decided that I was going to leave Altvia in the spring or late spring of 2021, when it kind of came clear, I wasn't necessarily planning on going back to work right away. And was able to negotiate and sort of navigate the transition here. And in July of 2021, kind of exhaled and said, wow, I guess I don't know what I'm going to do next, but we'll wait and see. And literally 2 weeks later, after I had officially wrapped up here, the guys from RCP reached out to me and said, hey, we've got a little bit of change here. Is this something that maybe you'd be interested in coming back to help us with? And at that time, I looked at it, and I think originally RCP was like, we need someone at RCP, and I looked at it and said, if we're going to do this, we really need to do this at the P10 level. If we realize the benefits of data, if we're going to be able to take this great infrastructure that RCP has always had in place and apply it to other managers, we need to be doing it at the P10 level. So that's how I ended up. I started my job with P10 in November of 2021. So it's been about 16, 17 months at this point, and it's been really cool. I mentioned Lindsay. Sure, she moved over to P10 with me from RCP, and we're trying to kind of carve out and build at P10 that is assisting all of 7 different private equity firms in implementing systems and processes for allowing data to move smoothly between all of those and up to P10 where it's appropriate. And it's been really cool so far.
The Duke and Ross, shout out to Ross. A lot of nostalgia memories. Yeah, with names and
keep it. Ross would be a great person to get on here. Lindsay would be great too. Lindsay would probably have lots of funny stories.
That's a great idea. You heard it here. We're getting them on. Yeah. Okay. So then let's go back to that question. Like, just what is it that you and I are very close friends, always will be. I watched you kind of go through that period, leading up to when you stepped away, and I've thought a lot about that and felt a lot about that. What was it like for you? I mean, like, what was the thing that caused you to feel that way? I mean, I can recall being like, it's okay, you can, like trying to sort of, because I acknowledge and still imagine, in hindsight, that it was a very difficult thing. Yeah,
it's really funny, Dobbs, that you even brought that up. Several conversations that you and I had, probably sitting exactly where I am sitting right now, and over in my old office, and kind of all places in between. And while I didn't have a therapist at that time, I could have used one, and you might have been the closest thing that I had to it. And I think that it was such an incredible journey from I always think of like the start date of Apex, was the precursor to Altvia, is on July 1st of 2016, and it was a grind. It was a grind, and I used to always say, and you've heard me say this, like, I just want to build a great company, and if we build a great company, everything's going to take care of itself. And so, but obviously there's this this sort of milestone or top of them that you hit when you can do a transaction and work with a great firm like Bow River. And having done that, I just sort of exhaled a little bit and was like, wow, what's the next thing to do? And I think I've gotten better perspective on this now. I don't think I necessarily realized it at the time, but I really enjoyed building something. And I think that it became very, very clear that we were now running something and running something with the mandate or the objective of further growth and stuff. But I think that it was an opportunity to just kind of exhale and look around. And I think Bow River brought in a bunch of great leaders and shifted some things around here. And I kind of felt like I'm not sure that there's a whole lot more left for me to do here. And so that was something that took, I think, several months for me to get clarity on. And when I got clarity on it, and then having conversations like several of the ones that you had, and I'm incredibly grateful for you just saying, like, it's okay. The way that I'm wired, the way, I guess maybe the way that I was brought up or things like that, I tend to, sort of be kind of hard on myself and to kind of have permission to be able to step away was really liberating. So that was cool. So thank you for that.
Of course.
Yeah.
How do you feel now? Like now you've done it. And I happen to know, I think, the answer because we sat and had many things to eat and drink and discussed it to an extent. But yeah, I mean, I suspect there's going to be, a lot of folks here as listeners that know you and worked with us and with you and all those things. And, like officially on the record, like, how does it feel now?
Yeah, it's been kind of it's been a really interesting 8 months or so, I guess, with that little bit of down period between me leaving here and getting started with P10. Call it 18 months. So there's been lots of ups and downs. There's been candidly lots of times where I've wondered, like, did I jump back into something too quickly? And the reality is that I don't think that that's the case. Opportunities appear when they appear, when they're supposed to, whether it fits mine or not. And I think, from my perspective, there's not another job that I would want to be doing right now. And I think that I'm probably uniquely qualified to do the job on behalf of RCP and P10 and the other affiliates, just in terms of my understanding of, kind of the moving parts and some of the history. There's lots of cool technology that exists today, but being able to understand how and why things evolved the way that they did, I think is a perspective that I have that's pretty helpful over there. But yeah, there's definitely, along the way in the last 18 months, there's definitely been lots of times of like, gosh, I could just be playing hockey 3 or 4 times a week and go skiing. And the good news is that I've only got one child left at home of my 3 kids that well, and she's a 16-year-old daughter, and she doesn't really want to spend that much time with her parents right now anyway. So that has freed me up to do some other stuff. So the whole idea of like, oh my God, I could be home like hanging out with my daughter all the time, that might work for me. I'm not sure it would work for her. So yeah,
man, the hockey thing, there's a lot there. I think this. We still in one of our slide decks at the end. I think it's like in the deck. Have that image.
Yeah, that amber.
The goalie. Yeah. And I guess that's maybe a sort of poster child for this little thought, which is everything's and everything about you and everything about the history of this company is still very much alive, and so it's kind of cool in certain cases to see like. So that's at the end of like our what we call 940 on Mondays. Whole company spends 20 minutes kind of same page, and then that's at the end. And there's a lot of new faces around here these days. But that's like the last thing they see, after this thing on Monday morning, and it's cool. I mean, I don't know how many people know about it or how many people wonder about it, but it's right there, and nobody's like, why is that there? It's awkward or anything. It's very natural, and it's just kind of one of those things. It's like another thread in the quilt that just is there, and part of you still with every day for that matter.
Yeah, whether people realize or not.
Yeah. You got into the sort of P10 CP stuff, and the thing you said was, I feel like I'm uniquely qualified to do some cool stuff there. You most definitely are. I think so too. But I want to just kind of talk like what stuff is going on, like not specifically with what you're doing, but like now that perspective you have and what's going on in the market. is an outstanding one. What's your take on what's going on these days? And here's an interesting question for you to answer within that is, let's say you were going back in time and you were going to start another company. And I know that you're not crazy enough to go back and do that again. But if you were, given the viewpoint you now have, like what's going on in the market? Like what sort of stuff is interesting?
Yeah.
Where are we headed?
Yeah, it's funny. I had lunch with a guy that's kind of in our space a bit, kind of on the periphery of it, and he's got some neat ideas about a product is tangentially related to private capital markets, and he was picking my brain a little bit, and I think one of the things that they were contemplating is should we build something like this on top of Salesforce, and he asked me straight out, like, if you were to start a company today, would you build on top of Salesforce? And I was like, unfortunately the answer is maybe, but not. But I said, without a doubt, through 2014, 2015, 2016, like without a doubt, I would do that again, building on top of the Salesforce.com platform. And the reason is that it is, it's at the center of what lots of people are doing, like CRM and just that sort of stuff is really there. And in our case, like in 2006, when I decided it was time to start a company, I didn't have any capital. I mean, we raised a total of $85,000 to launch Altvia. And back in 2006, it just wasn't viable to start a company and rack servers and build infrastructure and things like that without, at least $800K, maybe closer to $1.5 million, just out of the gates, like just on servers and infrastructure and engineers. And so I think being on top of the Force.com platform allowed us to actually, get up and running and start to innovate and start learning about customers. Now, there's amazing pros and cons. We could probably have a podcast just about the pros and cons of building tech on another platform, whether it be Salesforce or anyone else. But I think as I think about the, it's kind of amazing when I look at like what's going on across P10 and all the affiliates. A core CRM is still a huge part of what we need to be doing, and I think that I've had exposure to lots of solutions out there, and I used to always say the same thing when we were talking to prospects and things like that. Like the selection of the form that you choose is probably going to be less important than what you do with it and the commitment that you have to using this and building your business around it. And the idea of kind of like a boring old CRM is still really, really central to what needs to happen. And so, I've got this like mandate or this vision at P10 where we're going to have incredible information that we are able to centralize. And just because we've got it centralized doesn't mean that everyone across P10 is going to be able to see it. But if we've got it centralized, we can aggregate it, we can work on it, in the best way. And our ability to have great information at the center is really dependent on having well thought out, well used applications on the edges. And a CRM is really what's at the edges. That's what most people on, that are, whether they're raising capital or deploying capital on behalf of, whether it's a fund of funds or a fund manager or even an institutional investor or other LP, that's kind of the interface. That's where people are doing their jobs. There's a lot that we can do to make those applications be better. But, I think fundamental, kind of rambling here a little bit, but I think fundamentally, like, the idea that we need to have great technology on the edges in order to present the information that we have collected, but also to collect the information that's relevant out there, whether it's phone calls or the status of a deal or the status of an opportunity or, being able to see shared data, whether it's inside of our firm or from other affiliates and things like that. It's really dependent on well-used, well-thought out of applications in the edges. That requires technology, that requires leadership, and it requires kind of process and discipline around it as well.
Yeah. The other reason to have based the technology upon Salesforce.com at that time is like every firm in this market was, number one, using it, and many of the early adopters were already clearly struggling with it, which is how you and I came to meet, right? So we were an early adopter of Salesforce as well and had hired a consultant, and I got to tell you, like in the 2 years you haven't been around on these sales calls, like there are still just a ton of folks, that are hitting that point still. It's just amazing.
Yeah, and I mean, I can tell you whether it's inside of P10 or other AOs that I talk to at other firms, it's not just people that have bought Salesforce and hired that. They're like, wait, I thought it was going to be better than this. I mean, this happens with like every imaginable, that there's a lot of thought, I think, of like, oh, you just turn this stuff on and all of a sudden we start doing it, or starts working, we're going to have amazing data. And it's like, no, it requires, if you are going to bring in a consultant, it requires a consultant that I think probably understands the industry more so than understanding the technology. I mean, the technology you can figure out. What you can't easily figure out is like, how do we take this technology and make it really, really work for our business?
Yeah. So much so, it's interesting. We were, I was on a sales call with a fund of funds just maybe last week, and had gotten to understand some of the problems they had with the vendor they're with now. And by all accounts, this vendor shall remain unnamed, but I think you and I both, and probably many, would agree that there's some good industry context and relevance, like domain expertise inside that company and how that product came to be. And it is a product. It's not necessarily like a sort of a Salesforce where you take it and kind of build it. And sort of interesting, because you and I have seen this a million times. We've talked about it openly. It's one of the things that still and I'm telling the story because I still am like, this is still relevant,
Yeah.
And in short, they were unable to articulate it in many conversations we had had. But when they saw in a demo we were giving them that like one of the analytical challenges they have right now, when they invest in the same fund twice, like the data doesn't come out right because they have to they can only invest in one fund for one amount according to the application, And so it's like that remains for me one of these things, to the point you were making, right? Which is just like, in some cases, even with the sort of context of the domain expertise, the stuff gets hooked. And it's just, I'm not really sure what to think about it anymore. It's been, happening for so long, and the fact that it still happens and people with domain expertise, and you're just like, sheesh, but it further your point that like sometimes even the really good domain expertise still isn't enough, at least from the purview that I see it.
Yeah. Well, I can't remember when I was used to this term, but I absolutely love it. And it's this idea of like the ability to look around corners. And I think that we had, especially in the early days, sort of if I think about kind of maybe like 2010, 11 to like 2014, when we had guys like we had Ben Hendershot and Joe Montero that had spent 15, 18 years at Accenture doing management consulting. That's who was implementing our product. And we had, I think, pretty tight loops in terms of it may not be obvious that we've got to do this thing right now, but we're going to, we can look around corners and we know that this is going to be a problem down the line. We know that as a fund of funds, whether you pick up a secondary or whether you decide to make another commitment to a fund or, as an LP, we anticipated some of those things. And I think the tricky thing was that sometimes, you'd be done with just like, oh, well, I really want it to be one click. Why does it need to be two clicks?
Yeah.
I get that you don't get it right now, but like in 12 months, you're going to get it, and you're trust me, you're going to be happy that we saw around that corner for you. And it's kind of a fine balance, because you don't want things to become overcomplicated. You don't want to have, you don't want to build a process around like the one time out of 1,000 that you're going to have to do it. And I do think, if I think about some of the challenges of Salesforce and building off of that platform, a lot of times how we wanted the data to be was it on how you could report on the data. So you kind of have to do some funny things to get that in there right. And that's one of the things that I think is really exciting now, is that continuing to have Salesforce be like a repository is great, but having some flexibility to be able to report on stuff and not have your reporting to be limited to how it's stored in Salesforce, I think is kind of a cool trend. And I think that's an area, like we talked about Ross and Lindsay, like that's something that they were way ahead of folks in terms of like, okay, having the data here is one thing. Now we want to have a lot more flexibility in terms of how we report on it, how we interact with it. So
yeah. How about this? Is there a company you've seen? Well, even so we're whole, but now you've started a company. It's been successful. You've stepped away from it. You're now right back in the thick of the same market, same technology, seeing a bunch of different vendors, I'm sure, that are coming to you with all sorts of things. You and I swap notes occasionally on that. Is there a company that is in that market, whatever, or outside it entirely, that you look back and you go, I wish I would have started that company?
Yeah, I wish I would have started it. Or I guess one thing that pops in my head is, in business has always had this the challenge of like expenses and expense reporting has been something that has existed, probably as long as there's been receipts and expense reports and things like that. And at our company, we use Expensify. Every time I use it, I'm like, oh my God, I love this. It's like they've just nailed it. And they've got like a little bit of complexity, what I love about it is like you never feel like you're at a dead end. You can like you use it and it'll take you as far as it can take you, and then if you have to like round off the corners on something, then you've got a way to go about doing that. And it's like. So that's an example, I think, as a user of technology. I mean, it just makes me smile every time I use Expensify because it's just like magic, and I love it. And they've got great integrations in the background and things like that. I think as it relates to private capital markets, I would say P is in. I mean, I used to always think this, and RCP's top decile, top 5% in terms of what they're doing. I think the challenge that we've got right now is that, a tech stack that was built to support one firm and really, the way it was built and the way that it evolved, like we've got an opportunity to kind of modernize some things, and we've got an opportunity to, say unscramble some eggs and do things differently and do things in a little bit more scalable manner. But I don't think that I certainly haven't come across many firms that have it as dialed in as RCP does. And it's been really interesting, just like Altvia has grown and evolved, and there's different faces and things like that. I mean, the people that we were working with at RCP and, the Rosses or the Roskis that were, the ones that were the worker bees, 7-8 years ago, like their discipline and their process has flowed through. Like analysts at RCP, like they maybe don't know all the why of why you do certain things, but it's like their discipline around getting data in a good way is incredible. And because they've got that discipline at the edges, we've got incredible data to work with in there. So, and you feel a little funny saying that. Like I've always had, CP's always had a special place in my heart, just, given the history and things like that. And you're like, well, I'm biased, maybe they're not really as good as I thought. But one of the things that's been really cool for me in the last 18 months is to work with other CIOs. And in some cases, it's CIOs that I interacted when I was with Altvia, and in other cases, it's folks that I've met since then. And it's trying to figure this out. I wouldn't say that there's anyone that just has the magic button. And, like I said, while I think RCP is as good as anyone, I know for a fact that there's lots that we need to do to improve how the sausage gets made.
Yeah, we've always kind of acknowledged that dynamic and even played to it. It's just such a competitive market. So, which is what I love about it, right? Like even if you're at the top of the food chain, you're sort of constantly looking back, where it's going to catch you, and that drives you to be more competitive, and it drives everybody. So yeah, I love it. What else? Like, so everybody's struggling with the sort of data thing. Seeing the slides still kick on today, but you look at some of these like surveys done of private market CFOs and stuff, and usually like this question of like, what's the biggest operational challenge? And usually it's data, and then from there it's like reporting, and we always joke, it's like, well, it turns out those are one and the same.
Yeah, kind of related.
What do you like if you step outside of kind of data and stuff? Like what else are some of these folks that you interact with and stuff talking about? I mean, like the reporting's clearly related, but like why is it? Why does anybody do any of this? I mean, what's the sort of thing like if you're not a technologist that people are talking about? And you're talking to technologists for the most part, but like what's the sort of end game with the data and reporting things? Like what are people kind of thinking and talking about?
Yeah, I mean. There's lots of themes. I think that there's certainly a little bit of keeping up with the Joneses, and there's this idea that like, you see a cool pitch deck from another manager, and especially I think as a fund of funds or an LP, you kind of get to see this whole world, and it's like, oh my God, we saw this deck from manager XYZ Partners, and they're doing this incredible stuff. We should be doing that. So I think that there is it's a little bit of like just keeping up with the Joneses and maybe some FOMO. Like, oh my God, these guys seem to have it all figured out, and I can guarantee you. Most firms to the extent that they have it figured out, it looks like they've got it figured out more than they actually have it figured out. Mm-hmm. So there's still a little bit of duct tape and baling wire that goes into these things, and I think that that's okay. That there's that because that's how we evolve, and sometimes like if you didn't have the ability to use duct tape and baling wire to make something creative work, then you'd never get there. And so I think that there's, around reporting and data, it's still a challenge. I don't think anyone's got it completely nailed, but I think that more so than what existed like 10 years ago. I think that there's this perception that you should be doing it. I think that there's certainly, if you look at other industries, and obviously folks that are in private equity look at other industries a lot, and they're able to look at that. I think that there is far more capabilities that exist today from a technology perspective, regardless of the industry, than we had 10 years ago. So I think that folks not only feel this need, but they're like, wow, we're looking at a pharmaceutical company, or we're looking at someone that does daycare, and they've got all this great data. We should have all that great data. So I think that there's maybe more of a sense that like the tools are out there, and I think that there's better tools, and whether it's private capital market specific technology, there's much better tools, but also just the capabilities that we get by moving things to the cloud, and the capabilities that we've got with databases and with analytics and things like that. There is better tools, but I think that there still exists this problem of like, okay, how do we actually harness this, and how do we make it work in our business? And it still comes back to if you want to know like how you're touching a prospective investor or a company, or who your best intermediary deal sources are, you have to have that log somewhere,
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully we can do some things to make it easier. We can make it easier for that analyst to say, I got another deal from so-and-so investment bank. But you can't do this amazing analysis if we're not collecting the data, and that problem still exists.
Yeah. I was talking earlier today internally with some folks, and was asked my thoughts on the application of like AI, which, at this point, as we sit here right now today, is people really mean like Chat GPT,
Yeah.
And it's, it's sort of like, it's like, well, it's a little bit of like a bubble mania on just that term. So, we're hearing a lot of people that are like just simply coming out to take advantage of that. Like, this big spike in the usage publicly and formally by companies of AI. And I think about like BuzzFeed sort of laying off all of their writers and going to ChatGPT instead. The stock, it's like up 150% or something, right? And it's like, in the long run, does that really do much for I'm not really here to say yes or no, but feels like the stock price benefited quite a bit from, at least mentioning it, and obviously from cutting some costs too. But it's like, that term gets thrown around a lot, and especially right now, as if it is implied that there's just this obvious way to get the information that you need, and which is proprietary to you, and which requires translation somehow. And it's just like, well, why do I have to enter this?
Yeah.
And when you have these sort of manias with like ChatGPT, it's like, well, this thing can write article. There's a bit of that, but it's like, come on, is it really that hard?
Yeah.
And you just have to do it.
Yeah. Or I gave it this schedule of investments, and it pulled out, the net asset value of the 10 portfolio companies in there. It's like, well, we've got 250 different of investments that we get.
Yeah, all different fonts
every quarter, and it's great. Like if I can sort of feed it into this machine and it pops up on the screen, but like we don't need it on the screen. We need it like in a structured database. So I mean, I think that I'll share a funny story about ChatGPT, because I think it really speaks to it. So I think in the world, sometime between December 1st and February 1st, we all like went down a little ChatGPT rabbit hole, and mine was on a Sunday morning, and I was just like, I just made a coffee in a really nice Breville coffee maker, and I was reading about ChatGPT, and I was like, ChatGPT, write a poem about my Breville Barista Express, and it spit it out. And it was like a beautiful poem. I mean, there was a few things like, and so I sent it to my kids, because my kids like big coffee drinkers too. And I said, hey, I was just feeling really creative this morning, and I wrote this poem about our coffee maker. And I didn't hear anything from any of them. And then about an hour later, I was like, I'm just going to mess with them. And I'm like, okay, ChatGPT, write a haiku about the Breville Barista Express. So it writes this great, and I send that to my kids on our family chat. And you still don't hear anything. And then I wait like, 10 minutes, I'm like, okay, write a limerick about, and I'm like, they've got to like be figuring out,
Give
it's
me
like
something.
they've got to like, maybe I'm creative and I'm sensitive and stuff, but I can't I don't have that capacity to like whip out, limericks, haiku, and poem.
Yeah.
And so finally, my daughter Sophie calls me. She's like, "Oh my God, I sent your poem to my friends." I'm like, "This is incredible." I was like, "Soph, I got bad news for you." She just felt like she's like, bleepity bleep. Like, I can't believe you did that. But I think the funny thing is that I think ChatGPT, I think AI, it's going to be incredible. And I'm far from an AI expert, so I could quickly get out of my element here. But I think the thing is like, like, oh my God, a machine can write a poem. Well, it's like the machine is only able to write a poem because lots of people wrote poems that the machine is able to look at and say, oh, this is a poem.
Yeah.
So I think that, eventually I think the machines will take over, right? When that's going to be. But I think the thing to me that it spoke to is like, as an analyst, if all I'm doing is going and sort of looking up stuff and then putting that stuff into a slide deck, ChatGPT can do that. But what ChatGPT can't do is like, okay, what is the implication of this stuff? So I see it more as a tool and more as something that we need to embrace and we need to figure out. But it doesn't exist on its own.
Yeah.
It can't exist on its own. It doesn't have value in and of itself.
Yeah. Yeah. And the thoughtful application of this stuff, I think, is what's key, right?
Yeah.
It could be that continuing to apply it thoughtfully in the right places to solve the right problems will then train it to ultimately take over.
Yeah.
I also think it's hilarious that one of the founders carries around like a backpack. Have you seen this? He's got like a backpack with like a remote detonate, if I understand correctly, in case it turns.
Yeah.
It's sort of like,
yeah,
we know it's smart enough to potentially go off the rails and but maybe thoughtfully applying it to the right problems many times over and over, then it actually does become smart enough to totally take over. But I totally agree with you that for the time being, the thoughtful application is what wins. Like I saw that Microsoft was introducing like the ability to auto reply to emails, like inside of Dynamics, something like that, right? Was part of what the $10 billion they invested were going to immediately lead to. And they may have even launched that by now. Great, application of making a human more effective. Like, was the news that the rep didn't have to update his fork, that they just got rid of the rep entirely for ChatGPT? No, but it was a very thoughtful and I thought like tasteful of where the power of the technology is.
Yeah, and the ability for email to auto reply was something that's actually accurate and helpful to the person that had sent that email is highly dependent on that it's got a body of work to look at and say, here's how we respond to stuff. So
like, how did it not reply with the information that I have in my head, but which I didn't enter into the CRM? Come on.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So
yeah, interesting stuff. Well, you mentioned your children, and I just got to tell you as we wrap it up here, your children are amazing. Your family's amazing. I got to grow. You got to see me without kids, and so we're behind you. And my wife and I often refer to your children and say, like, let's hope that one day we have children like the Kellys. So not everybody that would be listening would know your family like I do, but I feel since you mentioned them, first off, shout out to them.
Yeah,
and to your lovely wife, Kristen.
That means a lot. Thank you.
But you're done on a lot of things. Kids, family, building a great company, all the things. So tremendously to you for joining me. But way beyond that, for our friendship and for what we've shared and what we've accomplished together, it's, huge part of my life too. So thank you.
Yeah. Memories definitely come racing back sitting in this spot. I think that I coined this office the travel agency because it's like right in the middle of the office with a big window that everyone can see in. But definitely have a lot of memories sitting here that, obviously had a huge impact on the business, but more importantly on me as a person. I think back to many times on the road with you, and I'm grateful for our friendship and that you called me back in 2010 or 11 or whatever and asked for help in my network, and you decided to come to work for us instead. So
yeah, man. Amazing stuff. It's fun to recall it back. And of course, people who are listening wouldn't be able to see this, but if this doesn't sort of personify this office right now with, you suggested, and somebody else did too, that it kind of looked like a fort in here. And that's not a permanent thing. It's like this because we're to dampen the sound here as we sit across from each other and not get too mixed up on microphones. But at the same time, when I walked back in here, I was kind of like, this is just sort of symbolic, I suppose, of like the madness, the sort of all over the place, history that you and I share together, which again, I'm very fond of. So thanks for coming on, man. Thanks for sharing the thoughts, and just thanks for being you.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. I appreciate it.
All right, man.